Hi, this is Holly Brockwell for ShinyShiny, and this is the ASUS ZenFone 4. Now you might remember that we recently reviewed the ZenFone 6, which is this enormous behemoth of a 6-inch phone. So this is the 4-inch version from the same range, and there's also a ZenFone 5. So this one obviously is a lot smaller, it's also a lot fatter, so when you kind of first see it, it's heavier than you expect it to be, because you look at the side and it's kind of thin there, you know, this straight bit here, and then it's got kind of almost what I would call a belly really sticking out of the back there. It just kind of becomes much deeper in the middle, so it is actually quite hefty, it's quite chunky. But it does nestle nicely in your hand because of that kind of rounded back, and it's got matte touch plastic on the back there. ASUS say that it's designed to feel like ceramic, which I can see actually, it kind of does feel like ceramic, especially I think the white one helps that feeling, but it's obviously not as cold as ceramic would be, so you're not going to be fooled, but it does feel quite nice, and I think it looks nicer than it probably would if it was glossy plastic. You're not obviously going to get metal at this price range. That back cover is removable, although good luck getting it off, it took me absolutely ages. But you can buy different colours from ASUS at a slightly eye-watering £14.99 each, which is quite a lot for a little bit of plastic, but for that you do get the power button and the rocker, the volume rocker built in. Which is kind of good really, because it means if something goes wrong with your power button or your rocker button gets sticky or whatever, then you can just switch out the case instead of getting the whole phone repaired, which is always a good thing. And the battery in there is removable as well, which is always a good point to have in a phone, because you know, if you're going out somewhere or you're going to need a kind of a top up, or you just want an emergency battery in your bag, it means that you've got that option. So I'm always a fan of that. So on the whole it looks okay. I mean, the front is obviously quite generic looking. You've got the usual kind of black bezels and usual kind of screen, but it does have soft touch buttons, which I think is a good thing at this price range. It's only £99, so very cheap, and it's got these kind of lovely concentric circles here underneath the screen, which is kind of an ASUS trademark, and you can probably see it a little bit better there on the bottom of the ZenFone 6. So that looks quite nice. I mean, it's not a phone that anybody's going to kind of go, wow, where did you get that? Although more so in the other colours, you know, the bright blue is very nice, for example. But it doesn't look too bad. Actually, I think if I didn't know that this was an ASUS phone, I would probably guess that it was an Alcatel. It feels a lot like an Alcatel. It just has that kind of slightly plasticky budget phone feel to it, but then it's going to, you know, for 99 quid. So on the side here we've got the volume rocker and the power button, so if we just switch the screen on there. The screen is not amazing, sadly. It's only WVGA resolution, which is, you know, it's not great. This is one of the places where ASUS have made the choice to kind of cut the specs a little bit, because obviously when you're making a phone for £100, you have to make cuts somewhere. You're not going to make an amazing phone for that price, although, you know, to be fair, the Moto E does come quite close. But this is one of the places that they've chosen in any case to cut the budget, so it's not, I mean, it's not by any means terrible, but it's just not great, especially in terms of viewing angles. So if you have a look there, it's funny, isn't it? You kind of tilt it one way and it's kind of fine, and then you tilt it the other way, completely unusable. And I mean, you might think that that's not really a problem, but then if you play any games that kind of, you know, the kind of driving games where you're sort of tilting the phone to steer and that kind of thing, you are really going to notice that loss in brightness and that contrast change. So that can be quite frustrating. But having said that, gaming is actually really good on this phone. It has a gig of RAM and a dual-core Intel processors being kind of an ASUS signature and one of the points of difference about this range. It does really well with gaming, which I was surprised about actually for the price. You know, I put it through its paces with various different kinds of games, and it did really well. I didn't have too many problems. I've had a little bit of lag, a little bit of stuttering, you know, and I've had that in general with using the phone. A couple of times, you know, the keyboard struggled to catch up and things like that, but not to any great extent, and not any more so than I've seen on other phones kind of this price range, so I think that's fair enough. Although in terms of typing, you are going to struggle a little bit, because you know, the screen is so small that you haven't got a great deal of space there for keys, so it does often feel a little bit like you're quite cramped up and you mistype more often, and generally end up feeling like you've got massive sausage fingers. Or I did anyway, maybe that's just me. Pressing that home key there, the haptic feedback, as in the touch vibration feedback, is very strong. I don't know if you can hear this, but if you keep tapping it, it kind of sounds like a lawnmower. See, it's pretty loud, isn't it? You do also have to tap it quite hard for it to register. You know, quite a few times I've tapped it and it's just ignored me. And also there's no backlight on those soft buttons there, but that's to be expected. You know, we can't ask too much for £100, and I personally would rather that money was spent elsewhere. Where they have spent the money is in the camera. So compared to other phones of this price, this is a really good camera, and blessedly includes almost all of the software features that we saw in the ZenFone 6. So lots of options there. Some of my favourites include miniature mode, which is also known as tilt shift. So if you're kind of looking out over a town or looking at a bridge or something like that, you can use this mode to make it look like a tiny little toy town, which is quite fun. That's a really enjoyable one to use. And then there's depth of field, which blurs the background, so that's particularly good for taking pictures of flowers, for example, so you can blur out the things behind it and make them really stand out. It is a little bit hit and miss, it always is. But when it works really well and makes it look like it was taken on a much more expensive camera than this. So that's great. The HDR mode makes a big difference. You'll see in the photo samples in the full text review that it makes a huge difference to the amount of light and detail in the photos, which is great because a lot of cameras come with HDR modes. Not all of them make that much difference. Some of them, you know, aren't amazing, but this is a really good one that actually does work. There's also a couple of kind of time-related modes, so there's All Smiles and Time Rewind, both of which let you go kind of back and forwards in time, as strange as that sounds, to kind of make sure that you get everybody smiling and capture the moment that you want. That's quite good, although, I mean, it's not particularly new, but it is nice to have in the native camera app. And then there's my personal favourite, which is GIF animation, which allows you to film a video that it will then automatically turn into an animated GIF for you. They can get quite large, they only go up to kind of 30 frames, but even then it can get quite big, especially for sharing on places like Twitter and Tumblr. But it's a really fun mode to have, and I really enjoy kind of making GIFs out of things. Again, there's a photo example in the text review. But it's a good one to have, I think, natively, and you'll end up spending all your time making silly GIFs of cats like I have. So that's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of that, and I think a lot of people would find that a useful thing to have included. The only thing is that you've got to remember to switch it on before you take the video, because if you take the video and then try and turn it into a GIF, it won't be able to do that. You do have to remember to activate all of these modes beforehand. Some of those it's going to be more tricky than others to actually remember. There is no flash, unfortunately, on this camera, which I think is a bit of a shame, particularly because there is a selfie camera. The selfie camera being obviously on this budget, it's pretty rubbish, you know. I can't imagine anybody's ever going to use the photos from it. It's not even really good enough for video calling. It's pretty terrible. So I would rather have seen that removed and have a flash for the main camera instead. But, you know, you can't have everything. As I say, cuts have got to be made somewhere, and that's the choice that they've made. And in terms of making a choice as to whether you would like to buy this phone or not, if you only want to spend £100, and I would always recommend trying to bump that up a little bit, just because if you spend an extra 50, for example, you could get something like the Moto G, which is a big jump in specs. But if you only want to spend 100, you've basically got to make the decision whether camera is more important to you or screen, because this one's leagues ahead of the other phones in its range for camera, but the EE Kestrel and the Moto E do have much better screens. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts on that. The EE Kestrel does also have 4G, which this one doesn't have, but then you've got to deal with the Huawei UI as well, which is much less attractive than the ASUS version, although it does have that split notification bar that drives me nuts, where you get a different thing depending on which side of the bar you pull down from. Not a huge fan of that, and even after weeks of using ASUS phones, I still haven't got used to it. So if you'd like more information about this phone and its competitors, how it performed, you know, in detail with kind of photo samples and everything like that, then take a look at the full text review. The link is in the description, and thank you for watching.